Attendance roll call, starting off with Councilmember Oldham. Are you present?
Present.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark?
Here.
Councilmember Hugh? Councilmember Tomachoff?
Here.
Councilmember Turner? Vice Mayor?
Present.
I am present. Councilmember Turner? Not present. Moving on. Ms. Bauer, would you introduce item number 1 for us, please?
Proposed 2021 legislative agenda.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Here to provide the first item on today's workshop will be led by Ryan Lee, our Intergovernmental Programs Manager, and he'll have Deputy City Manager Brent Stoddard there to help out if needed.
Great, thank you, City Manager. Mayor and Council, here we are in the really the doorstep of a new legislative session. It's hard to believe everything that's occurred over the last 10 months, that we kind of have these lines of demarcation where we know that life is moving on, the world's moving on, and certainly the beginning of a new legislative session is one of those items. Ryan Lee, who's our Intergovernmental Programs Manager, who does a great job representing the city and the council at the legislature on a day-to-day basis, is here. He'll give you the overview of what we anticipate this session could look like. But as you'll hear from his presentation, a lot of things are up in the air. When I was driving to work this morning, I was trying to recall for myself kind of how everything ended. And it was almost like a Netflix show where, you know, you're starting a new season and there were so many cliffhangers from the previous session that they have to spend a few minutes kind of reminding everybody of everything that happened. So go back with me shortly to March of 2020 when COVID started to impact the state of Arizona. Cities and towns are issuing emergency proclamations. The governor's starting to take some action. At that time, the legislature, who was in the middle of their work, not towards the end, but literally in the middle of their work, took about a month and a half off, weren't coming together, similar to how things were shutting down and businesses were closing and people were starting to adapt to kind of a new reality in the pandemic. The legislature then came back together. The House did for a few days, I think it was May 21st, where they convened and they had hoped to pass a series of COVID-related bills, wrap up a few other priority bills, do some stuff with AZ CARES related to child care funding, related to other COVID assistance for businesses, and some liability policy having to do with the pandemic. So the House quickly gathered, passed those bills on to the Senate, and then sine died. The Senate didn't adjourn then for a few days, and eventually did come back on May 26th, and in probably one of the shortest days of work, and certainly one of the shortest sine die days in the history of Arizona. They met for about 3 minutes, considered none of the bills that the House had sent over, and immediately sine died, leaving every piece of legislation that had made its way through that process up to that point dead on the session floor. I think some of the House members, and in fact, if you go back and look at the news reports, particularly in the House, they had comforted themselves by believing that there would be a special session. In fact, I believe the Speaker of the House came out and said, "Nobody worry, there's going to be several special sessions that will happen between, over the next little while." Of course, now we know that there were no special sessions. The legislature's work was completed on the 26th, and they will now begin the session having wrapped up what everyone considered one of the most kind of remarkable sessions ever in the history of the legislature. And so what Ryan's going to present to you today certainly is some of the things that we're anticipating and hearing, but it could be a wild session with the pandemic continuing and their ability to meet or not meet, and how they meet, how they handle legislation, whether previous legislation that had made its way in the last session, new priorities. Of course, we're on the heels of the election and all those politics are taking place. So what you kind of see right now is one glimpse of what that people are talking about happening, but we will, of course, keep you posted, as Ryan does each week during the session, through the legislative updates to the bills and emails to you of what's going on. So for purposes of today, what we're here to do is to, again, have the council consider and adopt the legislative agenda which you set, which will then guide the efforts at the legislature. And we will, of course, continue to rely on your support and the relationships that you have with legislators as we advance this policy. And so at this point, with kind of that recap from my perspective, I'll hand it off to Ryan to lead us through the presentation.
Thank you, Brent. And I'd also like to recognize Bob Charles, who's in the audience. Bob is one of our contract lobbyists with First Strategic and has done a great job representing Glendale at the legislature and has done an incredible job providing election updates that we were sharing with the council as it pertains to the national elections, but also the state elections as well with Prop 207 and 208. So they've been busy helping us even in the interim. So let's go ahead and get started looking at the framework of the legislature. So the 55th legislature's first regular session adjourns on Monday, January 11th. Currently, after the election, there are 16 Republicans and 14 Democrats representing the Senate, and that is a net gain for the Democrats who did pick up the seat that Kate Brophy-McGee lost in the Phoenix district. In the House, there's a 31-29 split in the Republicans' favor. We know that, as shared with the council, that there was a seat that the Democrats picked up here in LD 20, but also the Republicans picked up the seat in LD 4 down in the Yuma, South Central Arizona district. And as a reminder, the Glendale legislative districts are District 13, District 20, 22, 29, and 30. And in Glendale, we are represented by 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats in the Senate, and in the House, we have an even split of 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. I wanted to provide this slide. This is a slide of notable leadership positions. There are several legislators that represent Glendale or the West Valley that have chairmanship seats in the House and Senate. And we know the influence that the chair has in their committee in setting the agenda and allowing bills to go through. And so I wanted to note those who represent Glendale. So we'll start in the House. We have, for the House Transportation Chair, we have Representative Frank Carroll. For the House Ways and Means Committee, we have Representative Shauna Bullock. For House Health and Human Services, we have Joanne Osborne. For House Land, Agriculture, and Rural Affairs, Tim Dunn. And for House Military Affairs and Public Safety, we have Kevin Payne. Kevin Payne represents Legislative District 21, which does not represent Glendale, but it borders our city. So it represents Peoria, Sun City, Surprise, and those. And we've maintained a very active relationship and a positive one with LD 20. So over to the Senate, you have Senator Paul Boyer, who chairs the Senate Education Committee, Senator David Livingston, who chairs Senate Finance, and Sina Kerr, who chairs Senate Natural Resources, Energy, and Water. So we'll continue to maintain a close relationship with our legislators who are also chairs. We'll try to use that to our advantage when weighing in on legislation that will have an impact to Glendale and be assigned to their committee. As we talked about maintaining that relationship, the next slide is legislative outreach. And this is probably one of the most important pieces of our jobs. And I want to say thank you to the council because over the last 6 to 8 months, as we've been dealing with the pandemic, we haven't slowed down our efforts to maintain a relationship with our legislators. And many of you have either on your own efforts or have worked with me to make phone calls, to have a virtual meeting, and just build that relationship or maintain that relationship, and it's gone a long way. Just in the last 3 or 4 weeks, as we've picked up the phone and spoken to both Republicans and Democrats and gotten their ideas of bills that we think are coming forward that have an impact to the city, they have that trust with us, with me, with this council, and that's very important. It also has given us an idea of what we may be able to expect when the legislature convenes next month. So part of that legislative outreach is also a legislative lunch that we have each year. We don't have a date set. We're trying to determine what is going to be happening at the legislature. But please keep in mind that is something that we're aware of, and it's a very valuable time that we're able to spend with our legislators. So we're trying to figure out what the best way is to have that meeting. Let's talk about some of the major themes that we anticipate this session. So first, the FY22 budget and revenue surplus. When we started last session, we were anticipating about a $400 million surplus, and there was a lot of talk about one-time appropriations and how the legislature distributes that revenue. Then, when the pandemic came and everyone was scrambling to figure out what was next for the legislature, there was worry of potentially a $700 million to a $1 billion shortfall. And so, as Brent alluded to, when just before the legislature adjourned and did so abruptly, they did pass a skinny budget. And that was basically the FY21 budget continued with just the bare bones. FY20 budget, carried into the FY21. And there wasn't any one-time appropriations or special allotments. Now, as we were preparing this presentation, we're looking at somewhere around a $400 million surplus. So the state has, like many of the cities, has seen a big windfall in Wayfair, the online sales tax collections. And so while there are some revenue deficits, there was enough carry forward that the state is anticipating about a $400 million surplus that they'll be able to allocate. So there will be some discussions about how the state handles the surplus, whether they want to spend that, draw that down this year, or continue to save that, not knowing the future. And then the next part is the state's going to have to determine the economic impacts of COVID-19. And there's a lot of economists with a lot of opinions. There's discussions of how long it'll take the state to fully recover with the job creation, with the expenditures and the economy, also with the tax collections and trying to recover. So we know that there's a lot of work ahead of us to determine what kind of economic impact there will be. But as we've always lobbied and advocated at the legislature, we want to make sure that any decision that the legislature makes regarding tax policy or even one-time appropriations is consistent with maintaining our operations as a city, making sure that we have the tools both in policy and in financial resources to carry out our operations in longevity. The next item is a one-time appropriation for a West Valley Senior Shelter. There's been a lot of discussion, even amongst council members, of what was this item that was brought forward last year. Senator Livingston introduced a bill that would have appropriated $5 million for the West Valley to get a senior shelter. That bill went through the Senate 27-3. It had a lot of support, and then it was parked in the House as it's standard practice for bills that have a financial means to it. It was parked and then ultimately held back due to COVID. So I've received confirmation that that bill will come back, and that will have an impact to Glendale and the West Valley. One-time appropriations to transportation and infrastructure. There's been a lot of projects identified over the last few years, and the legislature has discussed how they can invest one-time money. There are various needs across the West Valley, including the I-17, the I-10, the 101. So we're going to continue to work with our delegation to see if there is any traction on this and really advocate for the needs that Glendale has if that is a priority of the legislature. The next item is cancer presumption for first responders. Senate Bill 1160 was introduced last year. It increased the protections for firefighters and also had a $20 million request from the state to pay into a fund to help start the process, or at least further the process further along than what it is today. That bill ultimately did not have the support of the legislature, at least at the time when the legislature was moving forward pre-COVID. And so that bill will come back. There will be discussions about both the policy and the way to fund it, and so we anticipate that being a big discussion this coming year. The last two items is the restoration of the highway user revenue funds. I want to point out that it was in 2018 that we negotiated the highway user tax, and that was the special fund dedicated to fund DPS. That was a big win for cities. It was supposed to be the first time that we had seen a true end to HERF sweeps. The next year, as I mentioned, I think last year, immediately the next year, as part of budget negotiations, the governor agreed to repeal that fee over a phase-out period. Well, this year is going to be the last year that we see that revenue and those funds. So it'll be incumbent upon us to make sure that we tell the story of how all the expenses that are required to maintain our system, and also advocate for a true funding source for DPS. Finally, the last item is the tourism and rental car tax. As I think many of you have heard, there's an industry out there called Turo, and there's other industries that are a platform for individuals to put up their car for rental. It's a peer-to-peer car sharing. Currently, this model is not taxed, and it's having an impact on not collecting state and local TPT, but also the stadium surcharge. And so as we have our commitments to Camelback Ranch, we'll continue to advocate and lobby for an agreement to come to a resolution that will provide some taxes and some dedicated funding, or at least maintain the commitments that we've been expecting for Camelback Ranch. So those are the major themes that we anticipate that will come forward through the legislature this year. We do have two bills that we will be introducing. One, we have a slide for one, we don't for the other. The one without a slide is our state liquor board bill, and that's one that we've introduced the last 2 years. We had an agreement with the governor's office last year, and that bill did get out of the House, and it was scheduled for that last day of session for the Senate when the Senate adjourned without taking any action on the bill. So we will run that bill again. We've already spoken with the governor's office and made sure that our agreements are still in place. And I've also reached out to Senator Gray, who is in Senate Majority leadership, to ask what the fast track process is to make sure that this bill gets through and with as little effort as possible, which was part of the Senate President's commitment when the Senate adjourned. The second bill that we plan on running this year, which is new, which will be new to some of you, is repurposing municipal bonds. And I've got Vicki Rios here to help answer any questions. But as Vicki brought this to our attention, the question is can we repurpose our existing bond authority? And the counsel that we've received is that if it's not in state statute, we don't have the means to or the authority to do that. And so we've been working with our stakeholders, with the League of Arizona Cities and Towns, with some of our peer cities, and we've had a meeting with ATRA, Arizona Tax and Research Association, to get an idea of where we are with running a bill. And so far, as we see this, there's an understanding, or at least anticipation, that we will run a bill that will allow city councils to take to the voters the question of repurposing municipal bonds. So I'll turn it over to Vicki. She could talk a little bit more about the requirements and maintaining the bond, the rules for issuing bonds.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This actually is something that I think you asked us about, which is if we have existing bond authority that was given to us by the voters, but we no longer need it for that specific purpose, can we repurpose it to a different purpose? And the example that we often use is right now we have approximately $50 million in bond authority. And again, we're talking general obligation bonds for open space. And the idea here would be if the voters agree and we take that back out to an election, would we be able to ask the voters to repurpose that, for example, to parks and recreation bonds instead? And again, as Ryan said, the feedback we got from a few other cities is they would be willing, that doesn't cause any heartburn for them. In fact, it would help a couple of the other cities that are in a similar situation. We conferred with our bond attorney, Bill DeHaan from Greenberg Traurig, and he helped us prepare some language. The school districts have already run a similar type of legislation that allows them to do that, and we don't think we will get any opposition really from anyone because it's really unique to certain cities. Not all cities would ever probably need to do this, but for those who have the need, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback. It wouldn't change anything about the election. We would still have to list the projects and the new purpose of the bond the same way we would if it was just a whole new bond election. So it would follow very much along like that. But it would be a way for us to get some of this bond authority off of our books that we're no longer really planning to use and replace it with something in the future that we could actually use, or potentially just something that is not as restrictive as, say, open space. And with that, I'll answer any questions anyone has.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Rios, Is there a negative impact on the city for having authorization beyond what we might, at this point in time, think is necessary?
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, members of the council, no, there isn't any negative impact. In fact, when we first approached some of the cities, that's what they said to us. Well, why do you care? There's no negative impact. It doesn't impact anything. It's just sitting there. It's really more of a question for the voters again, right? So it's really giving the voters the authority to say, replace this with something else that is more up to date. Some of this bond authority that is sitting there is way back to 1999, 1998. I think we have some as far back as the late 80s. So there is no negative impact of leaving it there, but I think there is a positive impact of replacing it. So it's not about any negative impact.
Mayor, if I could, so Ms. Rios, it basically involves holding a bond election and asking the voters to authorize bonding in a new area, but they're using authorization from something that they would also have to agree is something they won't be needing in the future.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mayor.
Ms. Rios, so I'm a little confused. I was under the impression that we had a maximum capacity for certain bonds. Is that correct?
Mayor, that's correct.
Okay,
However,
so that is the limit, because if you have a bond that's been approved by the voters that you can't use because you don't have a project, that does affect your overall capacity.
So, Mayor, members of the council, that's a really good question, but these are so that limit of that capacity is for bonds that have been issued. These are bonds that were never issued. So this is authority that was received from the voters, but we never issued bonds and never did those projects. The only time it counts towards your capacity is when you actually issue the bonds.
Okay, then maybe my next question will be to Ryan. In that bill, could there be a mechanism that says if we don't have a use for that, that we can simply just have it removed off the book, so we're not holding a false capacity?
Mayor Wires, we have discussed that, and I think the feedback is to provide as much flexibility as possible. And so we haven't introduced any legislation, or at least discussed or drafted legislation that would allow us to cancel those bonds, if that's your question. But it's certainly something that we've discussed, and we have the means to do so.
And bottom line, no matter what, we still have to go back to the voter, whether we're asking for them to change what we're bonding for. No matter what, that doesn't change. The voters still have a say-so in it.
That's correct. There are even a few cities who have passed council resolutions to ignore some of the bond authority, but that could be undone by a future council. So there is no mechanism to cancel, and if it is, it would have to go to the voters.
Okay, and then a final question for Ms. Rios again. So if you have that capacity, that doesn't hurt our bond rating, knowing that there's a capacity out there that we could use but haven't used?
Mayor, members of the council, no, because each time you go to do the bonds, what the bond rating agencies and the bond holders or the potential bond buyers and advisors and all of those people just ask, do you have the authority to issue the bonds you're planning to issue now? They don't really ask or request anything about bonds that you're not actually planning to issue.
No. Any other questions?
And Mayor and Council, one other item. We also did bring this to the Arizona Tax Research Association, who's kind of the watchdog in the state over tax policy and those interests. And they had no issues with this proposal. In fact, they felt like this actually clarified some things in state statute that they liked the prospects of having to go back to the voters. Rather than some people trying to get creative and taking old bond authority and trying to pigeonhole new stuff through some, justifications of how it might look or not. So we did take that step of reaching out to some of those stakeholders who would have influence on those policy, and Ryan and Vicky walked them through that, and we got positive feedback from those groups.
I just had a couple of questions on some of the comments that Ryan had mentioned. You mentioned that there was a surplus of 400 million. Is that just the current fiscal year's surplus?
Yes, that's correct.
And what surplus was there from prior years?
Last year, there was a $400 million surplus, and so I will go back and get clarification, Vice Mayor, on what the end balance is for the state, what they're anticipating. So I'll get that back to you.
So I would guess it's more like closer to $1 billion of surplus overall, because I know it was more than 400 million that they had in their
Rainy day fund. Yeah, contingency. That's correct, Mayor, Vice Mayor Mounar. They did have a $1 billion rainy day fund that they had shared. That was one of the signature achievements by the governor and the legislature. And then last year, we were anticipating an additional $400 million surplus, and that money was paused. So I'll go back and figure out and find out what the end balance is that they're anticipating for the end of FY21, and I'll return with those.
Okay. The other question regarding that surplus, is that surplus also including excess COVID monies that have not been spent by the state, and where does that stand?
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor Mounar. No, the report from the JLBC Joint Legislative Budget Committee, that the $400 million surplus was in revenues, not with the state's portion of the COVID relief money. So I know the remaining balance is out there. I'll need to find that out, but that is separate from, I know that Governor Ducey has allocated funds to various departments for operations to maintain services through the impacts, through the length of COVID-19, but those two pots of money are separated.
Yeah, I would like to know that answer because, as everyone knows here, you know, the state withheld portions of the city's, what could have been the city's allocation of COVID funds, and I'd like to know if there is surpluses, what the plans are, how they're going to be used, and if there's any potential for the city of getting any more of those COVID funds. Thank you.
And Mayor, Vice Mayor, I might also add, and I know you know this, but it's a little bit different on the state when we talk about surplus. I mean, when we say in the city of Glendale, when the council passes a budget and we have some unallocated fund balance or something, that legitimately is funding that's not allocated, and we have no other commitments that haven't been met. But that's not the case on the state. Remember, the state has the authority to roll over payments, whether it's to education or to other things. And so there's this on a balance sheet type of game. So the state does run a structural deficit for monies owed to certain programs and operations and things. And so that's also always part of the policy debate down at the legislature, and the mayor knows this from years down there, of what portion of that, you know, that surplus, as we might refer to it, goes to pay back programs, policies, voter propositions that have funding payments that rolled over that weren't made by the state. So it's never a truly pure number of this is, you know, the state's paid all of its obligations, this is money free and clear to try to prioritize. There's always that structural deficit that kind of creates that tension of one-time funding for new stuff or a portion of it paying back. So I hope that makes sense, but it's a little bit different in the sense of when we talk about either a revenue deficit or a revenue increase for the city as it is with the state.
Mayor, if I may, I appreciate that, and I would like, maybe you could go through that gyration and determine if there really truly is, you know, taking into account those rollovers, et cetera. If there is truly a budget surplus or if it's just on paper. Thank you.
Okay, we'll quickly go through the legislative priorities. This is in our 2021 state legislative agenda that we have before you. So these priorities include fiscal sustainability, economic development, land use planning, military preservation, neighborhoods, public safety, transportation, and water. So these are the very targeted priorities that we have set and bring forward to the council to have, ask for your consensus on, so that we can move forward with our lobbying efforts and advocating on behalf of the city.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
with regard to economic development, this has always been an exercise in futility, but I'll ask anyhow. TIF funding, is there any appetite at the legislature to enact any kind of broad policy with regard to that mechanism?
Thank you. Mayor, Councilmember Clark, there is not an appetite with this legislature. It has been discussed repeatedly. Mayor, I hope it's okay to share, we were in a meeting, we just did a touch base with one of our economic development partners with GPEC and discussed this at great length. I know that there's an appetite outside of the legislature, but this issue has been blocked and continues to be blocked, at least by legislators who have opposed it and continue to represent the state down at the legislature. Okay. So the final piece is just a reminder of what's available to the public and our efforts to make sure that our residents are informed and have an opportunity to voice their opinions, concerns, and thoughts. So we do have on here our department webpage that's updated on a regular basis, and then we have on that webpage information about our legislators and our federal congressional district, our Glendale districts, contact information, our legislative agenda, and our legislative link program that continues to be an outreach effort by our department. So, Mayor and Council, with that, I stand for questions.
See any? I don't see any.
Okay. Mayor, we are seeking consensus for the 2021 legislative agenda.
Like you got it. Thank you. Ms. Bauer, would you like to introduce item 2, please?
Community Planning and Development Grant Allocation Recommendations.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report. That will be done by Jean Marino, our Director of Community Services, and she'll be assisted by Matthew Hess, who's our Community Revitalization Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We are excited to be here before you today to talk about the recommended strategies. You'll recall that in October, we presented at a workshop and received some preliminary direction from the council on a couple of items. So today is going to be the presentation of the work that we've done with CDAC at their November meeting and recommending some allocations for these investments. The Community Development Advisory Committee, which is a committee made up of residents from our community, are unanimously recommending these allocations. So one of the things that I wanted to just mention before we get started is that what you're going to see today is some very high-level recommendations, similar to what you would see in a budget workshop. Once we receive some direction from you today on whether or not you're comfortable with these recommendations, then our work will begin. You'll see the recommendations formulated into an annual action plan, or in the case of some of the funding, an amended action plan. And then that would be brought forward to you for adoption, similar to how a budget adoption would occur as well. And then at the same time, we would continue to work on developing RFPs and RFQs related to some of these items, should that be council's desire. So just a quick presentation overview. So we'll just briefly touch on the consolidated plan goals. We'll talk about the investment strategies, how the funds are being recommended to be allocated, and then we'll get into detail on the recommended allocations. And then ultimately, obviously, we're looking for consensus direction from council today on all of these recommendations. So just as a reminder, all of these funding recommendations are community planning and development funds. It includes 3 sources of revenue for the city that are provided by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Those sources of revenue include the Community Development Block Grant Fund, the Emergency Solutions Grant Fund, and the Home Investment Partnerships Grant Fund. This slide here shows the 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan goals that were adopted by Council last June. We are required as a grant recipient to have a 5-year plan. These are the goals that are reflected in that plan. There are a total of 6 goals. When we get into the recommendations, you'll see that we have demonstrated how these recommendations address each of the plan goals, which is a requirement of our annual action planning process. When we met with you back in October, we talked about some of the process improvement changes that we were implementing as part of our grant allocation process. So the investment strategies that you'll see today really demonstrate how these investments are aligned to our adopted goals, demonstrates how we're using the grant application process to address public services for vulnerable populations, which is a very important part of our community. Those particular fund sources, again, just as a reminder, are limited to 15% in most cases of our overall allocation, with the exception of the CARES Act funding. But essentially what we are seeking to do with this new revised process that we're presenting to you and implementing currently is really just improving the efficient delivery of these services to our community and really thinking strategically about how to make these investments to create a measurable and demonstrated impact, and really looking at a results-driven contracting approach to really driving performance outcomes for our subrecipient contracts, as well as for programs that are city programs that we offer that we're recommending funding for.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Before we get into some of the specific funding, I just want to reiterate for the benefit of the council and for the public the specific funding sources that we are talking about today. We do have 2 rounds of CARES Act funding that have not been discussed previously. One is our second round of CDBG, about $2 million, and the second round of ESG funding, which is about $3 million. You see on the right, there's approximately $3.4 million of fiscal year 22 funding. We are at the beginning of that planning process. We typically start 6 to 8 months in advance of the action plan. Right now, we do not have final allocations, as is typical. Those final allocations for each of those funding sources typically come sometime in the spring, but for the purposes of planning and discussion at the moment, these figures represent our level funding from this fiscal year. The remnant funding you see at the bottom, that is leftover CDBG funding that remains after a number of projects that were completed came in under budget, and so those funds would need to be reallocated for a different purpose. And so in total, we're talking approximately $9 million all told. And before we talk about the specific recommendations, just a few things to keep in mind. As Ms. Moreno had said, each of the consolidated plan goals are addressed in these recommendations. They do advance the CDAC's primary goal, which is to advance affordable housing. That's something that we had worked on with the CDAC that they had recommended through our discussions and our meetings over the last several months. The Master Services Agreement is a special kind of RFQ that we are proposing to use to address homelessness in the city. We have prior council and community feedback on these neighborhood-type programs. The recommendations do afford the opportunity to have some more granular, specific discussions about the specific types of neighborhood improvements, whether that be infrastructure, streets, curbing, gutters, things like that. And then something also to note is anything that's labeled with CARES Act must address the pandemic in some way. And finally, when we took this to the CDAC meeting in November, they did provide very positive feedback and unanimous consensus to move forward with these recommendations. So just to reiterate, goal number one, which is our consolidated plan, goal number one, is to advance the goal of creating affordable housing opportunities in the city. So you'll see approximately about a third of the total allocation. The first couple of items you see here, the home funds and also the emergency home repair, are done by RFQ. They're currently procured through an RFQ type process. We do intend for those to be, as Ms. Moreno had indicated, results-driven contracts. You'll note that under the activities in the home funds, this is essentially a list of all home-eligible activities. We have not, or we will continue to be working with the CDAC and also have further discussions with the council to discuss what particular type of affordable housing activities, but it is worth noting that home funds, it is required for this purpose, for affordable housing. Emergency home repair is a very successful program that we currently outsource, and so we do recommend that we put some additional money towards that. The final 4 activities are, with the exception of the landlord liaison, are currently being operated. Eviction prevention is something that the Community Action Program has been very diligent on in the last several months, and there is still some substantial need, and so a recommendation to supplement that activity is included. The landlord liaison services, functionally, we are finding it to be beneficial, or could be beneficial, to have someone act as essentially an ombudsman between the city, property managers, property owners, to be able to form those relationships, provide education to landlords to entice them to want to participate in our programs, and also help them guide them through the process to make it simplified and easier for them to be able to receive or to participate in our programs.
The mayor and council will pause here to ask if there are any particular questions about the recommendations on this slide.
Mayor, just one. So you're proposing that we spend $250,000 to entice landlords to get involved in CDBG and city programs? Is that what I'm hearing?
Mayor and Councilmember Clark, so the $250,000 that's represented here is a placeholder, and yes, we put that in there. We expect that that would be a 3-year type of a program. And what we're finding, especially as a result of the COVID crisis, is that there's a little bit of reluctance from landlords to cooperate and participate in our programs. So the idea is that we would utilize this as a means to help educate the landlord community about our programs, to listen to them about reasons why maybe they aren't necessarily interested in participating in those programs, and identify strategies to help bridge the gap. Ultimately, what we know that we have to have a stock of affordable housing. Helping our tenants find those affordable units is critical to continuing on our mission for eviction, to prevent evictions, to ensure that people have access to decent affordable housing in our community. And so we're hoping that this is because it is CARES-related funding, and this is something that we've seen as an issue dealing with the COVID crisis. So we're hoping to use this as an opportunity to gain some insights and to build those relationships. But we do expect it to be a 3-year program.
All right, that would be approximately $80,000 a year. And it would be to basically encourage landlords to convert some of their rental units to affordable housing. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mayor and Councilmember Clark, it wouldn't necessarily be to convert. It would be to participate in, so as an example, our Housing Choice Voucher Program, making sure that they understand the benefits of participating in the program, which is essentially that they have a steady stream of income. If they have a certain number of units that they rent to our Housing Choice Voucher clients, that's steady income for them. So that's an opportunity for them to make sure that they can meet their balance sheets and things like that. Additionally, those Housing Choice Voucher clients tend to be, long-term residents, because that voucher, unless they are no longer qualified for the program, stays with that person. So it is an opportunity that we'd like to use to invest. But yes, to your point, our goal would be to continue to encourage housing choice with apartment communities and other landlords throughout the city. The other opportunity that it presents for us is to do more specific outreach with single-family homeowner or single-family unit owners with participating in the program, et cetera.
All right, thank you.
The second consolidated plan goal to address homelessness in the city of Glendale, this is the master services agreement that Ms. Moreno had discussed previously. At its heart, it's an RFQ, it's an RFP. It's a little bit kind of a different type of RFP that would put out. It includes multiple funding sources and allows for multiple services under a single agreement with one or possibly two different vendors. You'll notice that all the activities here listed on the left, these are activities that we do currently fund predominantly, not all of them. But currently we have multiple contracts with multiple vendors. And so getting those programs under a single umbrella of services we find would be conducive to creating a sort of like a local continuum of care and also an umbrella of services that has a lot easier connections.
So, Mayor and Council, I'd like to add here, so, Councilmember Aldama had raised a council item of special interest as it relates to Glendale's homelessness strategy. There have been many conversations that have been taking place at the regional level with our West Valley partners, with our subrecipient partners as well, about the strategies that we need to put in place to address, things that are going on currently in Glendale. Obviously, eviction prevention is a significant component of preventing homelessness. So this particular strategy, we've been having a lot of conversations with CDAC at the staff level with our service providers, Mr. St. John, our Deputy City Manager for Public Safety, and I have kind of put together a high-level executive team task force to really identify some of these strategies that will ultimately culminate in that plan that we'll be, talking with council about in the coming months. But I just wanted to recognize and mention that, this is definitely the culmination of a lot of conversations and activity, and will ultimately be addressing Councilmember Aldama's council item of special interest. Are there any questions about?
Thank you, Mayor. This would be basically, I just want to make sure I understand, this would be essentially, say for example, shelter beds. This would fund additional, basically reserved, I think if we're not doing it yet, we're moving towards reserving beds at CAS, so that would I just want to make sure. And then for Glendale Works, I'm a little bit confused too, because we're looking to put all of this under a master services agreement and have some third party administer all of this, or?
Mayor, Councilmember Tolmanchov, so currently the way we administer all of these services is through individual service contracts. So you mentioned Glendale Works, that's a contract. The cash shelter contract, we do have a linking agreement for that. We have we have contracts, subrecipient contracts for street outreach with Phoenix Rescue Mission and with Community Bridges, Inc. So what we're seeing is that we have all of these individual contracts that are tied to specific funding sources for specific needs and reasons. What the hope is here, and this is going to be a test. It's going to be, basically a pilot to see, does this stick and can this work? Is really looking at defining what it is we're trying to accomplish as it relates to influencing homelessness, but creating the flexibility so that, as an example, if the current environment changes in Glendale and say, we don't necessarily need to do as much with street outreach and we need to do more with mental health counseling, we have agreements in place that allow for that flexibility because we're seeking the provision of services under this umbrella contract where all of these services are eligible and it wouldn't require us shifting gears and going back and doing new contracts. So yes, ultimately we would be looking at defining a performance-based and results-driven contract. It could be with one or two providers. Obviously, $3.2 million is a lot, so there may be one or two service providers out there that have the capability of doing it. But what we hope to see is that we have a service provider who gets that master contract, but then brings in subrecipient contracts, similar to how you would see in the construction world, where you have a general contractor and then they bring in subrecipients to provide specific, deep dive type level services, so skilled trades and those types of things. So that's really the concept. The one thing I'd like to just point out here is that a little over $3 million of this is CARES specific funding. It is one-time funding. Under normal circumstances, we only receive about $200,000 a year in emergency solutions grant funding, which is specific to homelessness. So this is a very unique one-time opportunity to, for lack of a better word, create the biggest bang for our buck under the provision of a master services agreement that allows for that level of flexibility, so that the service providers who are the experts in addressing the needs of the actively homeless community can have that flexibility to really create influence and create an impact for Glendale.
Thank you, Mayor. So because this is one-time funding, then once this, are we looking to move other operations that over to operate under a master services agreement? Because we're only talking about the additional funding here in this slide, but we already have Glendale Works, we're already doing these things. So are we looking to move all of that under a master services agreement, or is this just for this additional funding that we're allocating that's going to be under this master services agreement? I'm sorry, I'm just not sure I understand it.
Mayor and Councilmember Cholmachoff, for this upcoming year, what we're recommending is that the fiscal year 21-22, $200,000 of ESG be included in with the additional CARES Act funding under the Master Services Agreement. Obviously, should council desire to keep those two things separated out, that's one option. The other piece of it too is that when we go out to RFP and we are seeking providers that can provide these services, if for some reason we need to separate out a specific service. So let's talk about Glendale Works as an example. If for some reason we get responses and they only want to provide that service, we would still have the ability to grant that contract. The goal, however, is to get as many of these services bundled as possible to, again, create that flexibility, so that if we see that maybe there's a need to invest more in the Glendale Works program, maybe there's a need to invest more in street outreach, instead of having a very stringent and specific contract that says, okay, you can only do this service under this contract. So that's really the goal. It is a test. It's an experiment. We obviously are asking for the trust of the council to give us the opportunity to try this. Ultimately, when we put together that RFP, maybe we don't get a lot of interest in it. I will say that we've had some just very preliminary conversations about the concept, not only with our peer cities in the West Valley, but then also with some of the service providers in the industry, and their interest is piqued. So I do think that there will be interest in it. But again, it is something new and different, but it is something that we feel very strongly, and the Community Development Advisory Committee felt very strongly about it. Something that we need to try to create the greatest impact with this one-time funding.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one more. So how are you going to measure the data then, if it's an experiment, to see if it's successful?
Mayor and Councilmember Cholmachoff, so as a part of the results-driven contracting process, you clearly define and agree upon with service providers. We would define what are the outcomes that we are expecting to see from this process, and then we work with whoever ultimately ends up being the recipient of the contract to clearly define how are those measures. To make sure that we're all on the same page as part of the contracting process about how we will know if we have been successful. The other part of it that results-driven contracting strategies does is it creates active contract management. So instead of issuing a contract and saying, okay, send us your bill, we'll pay you, what you do is you create that opportunity where you're having regular engagement, regular meetings with that contract recipient to talk about any challenges that they're facing in achieving those key performance indicators, and then doing active course correction throughout the life of the contract so that you don't end up in a situation where you have a contract that falls flat and doesn't meet your expectations. So active contract management is absolutely a critical component to it. That's one of the reasons why we would like to move in this direction, because if we tried doing active contract management with 25 contracts, it's very difficult to do. To do active contract management with 1 or 2 big contracts that are providing a multitude of services, it is definitely something that's more manageable. So you'll see all of that if council provides direction to move forward with this. You'll see all of that culminate in a contract that will obviously come before council for approval.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Clark?
Thank you, Mayor. I think that this is a good strategy that we'll see how it works out for when you're dealing with an extraordinarily large sum of money, which is over $3 million. It seems to me it would lend itself well. And when you compare it to, for example, a street contract, that could be in that range. We use it all the time for that kind of work. However, I was a little taken back when you mentioned that typically in an annual year we get around 200,000. It would seem to me that there is less need for a master services contract with what I consider a relatively small amount of funding. And instead, what I fear will happen is that the master contract provider will eat away at the available money because they will take a certain percentage for administration of the contract, and there will be less available of that 200,000 to actually provide services, whereas we already have city personnel in place who year after year do administer the contracts associated with that normal allocation of 200,000. So I think my question is there's logic to using it for large allocations, but would you consider using it for a much smaller allocation, such as the normal one of 200,000 a year?
Mayor and Councilmember Clark, I think there's a good business case for using it for smaller amounts, and here's why. It's that level of flexibility to adjust your services based on what's going on in your community. So if under, say, next year, we don't have COVID-related funding, we have $200,000 of funding in ESG, and we say, okay, we're gonna spend, $50,000 on street outreach, and we're gonna spend $50,000 on this and $50,000 on that, and we break it up. That means that that is what you will do with that funding, versus if we said, okay, we have $200,000, here's our high-level goals and our key performance indicators that will tell us if we're successful in achieving that goal. Now you have some flexibility in the menu of services that you can provide to the community based on what's going on. And so I do think that there's an argument for using this concept for smaller amounts, even for maybe less complex issues. For this particular funding cycle, this $3.2 million, we'll have 2 years to expend that funding. So it will be a multi-year contract. What we do want to move away from in the future is if we know we're going to need to fund the same services year in and year out, of making sure that we're doing a comprehensive award process where we're soliciting responses and awarding a contract to a vendor that is renewable contingent upon the funding in the future years. So as an example, if we were just talking about the $200,000 this year, we would award that it would be a multi-year contract. We would be able to renew that contract And, our commitment is we would reevaluate that no longer than 4 years. But it gives us that opportunity so that we're not having to go out and re-procure that same service every single year when we know it's a service we need to fund every year, which is exactly what we do right now with our grant allocation process. So I do see this as being something that can be used ongoing. Even if you have a small amount, you still have the opportunity to award that contract as a multi-year contract that's renewable contingent upon the funding.
And I understand, and that's a good explanation. One follow-up request, I think, would be in order. It's not just a matter of seeing how well a performance-based provider works under one or two providers as the master providers. I also would like to see how cost-effective it is and which way is more cost-effective. Is it more cost-effective to procure the services of one or two master providers, or is it more cost-effective to use our current scheme of provision? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jean and Matt, for the presentation. My concerns probably would be best characterized as falling into the concerns of timeline. We have a little over $3 million of CARES Act funding, and this is for need that's in our community, as I understand it, at present. It's the last several months and the next few months or several months going forward. We're going to this master agreement, we're looking for RFPs and doing contract awards and all of that. Isn't that just burning time in which this money could be instead allocated to our current partner saying, you're doing good work in this area, here's some funding for you, dedicate it to Glendale. You're doing good work in this area, here's dedicated to Glendale, here's funding for you. Why aren't we taking that and getting this money out there more quickly?
Mayor and Councilmember Turner, that is certainly an approach. I think the concern that we have on the staff side is ensuring that we aren't missing something because we just simply don't know in terms of service delivery. And so that's where we're looking for the service provider community to tell us what their response would be and to meet these objectives and outcomes. I will say that, yes, the timeline is a concern because obviously the COVID crisis, especially as it relates to the COVID funding, our goal is to get that out there as soon as reasonably possible, get that money out into the community. So we are committed to, and we've already started work on kind of what the scope of work would be for these, particular services, certainly not getting out ahead of council, but understanding kind of what is going on and what are the current needs. So, our vision would be that this happens very quickly. Our hope is that it wouldn't, take 6 months, obviously. We'd like to get something in place before the end of the first quarter of next year. Hopefully that's possible. But again, even if we were to go to the service providers that we have now providing these services, it would still take reissuing a new contract, et cetera. So you wouldn't be able to eliminate that contracting process. You would still have to have a new contract that gave them a certain allocation and all of that. So there would still be a process associated with that. The difference being is that we would be talking about at least a handful of contracts, maybe even if not more. And then the other part of it too comes to how do we choose who gets what, which is why CDAC and staff is recommending that we go to this approach and transition ourselves to a results-driven contracting framework.
Mayor, Ms. Marino. It's kind of heartbreaking to hear that we might be able to provide people relief at the end of the quarter of next year. So we're talking about March or April. The eviction moratorium's expiring, within a matter of days or weeks. There's a lot of people in need right now. If if this was a system where we had an expectation that there would be additional CARES Act, in essence, money coming, again and again down the road, then I think this would be a terrific concept. And it may be a terrific concept even just as it is. I have concerns that we're not rolling this money out fast enough in our community. And I don't know that this helps us get it out there faster. And I'm not interested in just, raining money. We have to do this in a responsible fashion. I just have reservations about this, whether or not this is the best, quickest way to provide relief to the people that this CARES Act money is intended for. So I'm not saying no, I'm not saying yes, I'm saying I don't know. I do put a lot of stock into what our Community Development Advisory Commission recommends. They've spent 50 times more time thinking and studying this issue than I have, so that carries a lot of weight with me. I'm just saying that I have these concerns. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Councilmember Turner makes a good point, and I'm wondering, isn't there a possible way that we can, because this is literally, it's sort of like a trial to see if this way to manage services is going to work, but couldn't we hold some of this money out that we could use while we're still doing this? Do we have any contracts in place or programs in place where we could utilize some of this money now and still move forward with this, but maybe not necessarily putting all of our eggs in this basket?
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, Councilmember Tolmachoff. So one thing to just remind everyone of is that the ESG, the Emergency Solutions Grant funding, has to be directed towards addressing homelessness. Now, a portion of that can be addressing rapid rehousing and eviction prevention. However, the rules associated with that really require that that person be imminently homeless. What you saw in our affordable housing slide here, providing $1 million for eviction prevention, rapid rehousing to be administered through our CAP program. 500,000 of that, we believe we can just do a continuation of the county program. To address Councilmember Turner's concerns about, are we getting the money out into the community fast enough? I would like to just let everyone know it's not really a part of this presentation. It is a separate funding source, but we're down to our last $400,000 of eviction prevention and rental assistance through our community action program, which will bring us to $4.5 million that we have in partnership with Maricopa County gotten out into the hands of the people in our community who need it most in 12 weeks. That is significant. Yes, there is still a lot of work to be done, and I do not take lightly the timelines that we're dealing with. However, we have gotten a significant amount of money out into the community, which is critical. We are still continuing to receive requests for assistance every week. The good news is that the average payment is going down, and what that means is that people are no longer 6 months behind in their rent. They're only a month or so behind in the rent, so there is a little bit of stabilization, but we are continuing to see requests. So there's $1 million in affordable housing. To answer Councilmember Tolmachoff's question, could we hold more of this ESG COVID funding back, perhaps to be administered through our CAP program? Yes, we could, absolutely, and if that's council's direction, we could. It would need to be limited to the rapid rehousing and eviction prevention, and again, those are situations where they're being terminated from their lease or have been served with a 5-day eviction notice, those types of things. Did I miss anything? And so our hope is that through our other programs, we'll be able to keep people in their homes currently, but this funding can also be used to address the folks who are either currently homeless or about to become homeless. We need, these service providers would be expected to be able to provide the eviction prevention types of services that we could provide as just an opportunity to have more people doing the work.
Thank you, Ms. Moreno. I think that's something worth exploring, that we hold, I think this is a worthwhile thing to do, but especially now, I mean, with COVID so widespread, there's going to continue to be a need, an immediate need to provide rental assistance and eviction prevention to people now through this program. We wouldn't be ready probably to roll it out, you said, until hopefully maybe March, but if we're down to our last $400,000 in eviction prevention, I would like to see some of this money, we still do this, but some of this money moved into eviction prevention so that we've got money to work with between now and when this is ready to actually roll out into the community. I don't know what the numbers should be, but I just don't want us end up being in a spot where we don't have this ready, we've exhausted the 400,000, and now we've got people that we're literally not, that are going to become homeless because we haven't allocated any more money into that program.
Mayor?
You have a response?
Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachoff, the concern that we have on the staff side is because the differences between a rapid rehousing and eviction prevention using emergency solutions grant funding sources versus other CDBG funding sources and the regular CDBG CARES Act funding is very different. The requirements are much more stringent. The income qualifications are different. And so, certainly that's an option. We would have to come back to the council at a workshop in January to discuss those options and how that would work, which obviously adds a little bit to the timeline. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're hoping to get from council today is the direction to go ahead and move forward. If, as an example, we realize that, we don't have a service provider that can provide all of these services, for the $3 million, we would come back to the council just like we do, like with the remnant funding as an example. We had projects that came in under budget, et cetera. We would come back to the council and ask for direction on reprogramming and repurposing those funds. So that is always something that we would do if, say, as an example, we only awarded, under a master services agreement, we only ended up awarding a $1 million contract for certain services. We would come back to the council with recommendations through the CDAC for repurposing those funds. So that is always an option as well. So when we walk away today, if there are still some concerns, that is always something we would bring that back to the council.
One follow-up, if I could, before we move on. Is there another city that's in the region that's using something like this where we could sort of piggyback onto their agreement and maybe expedite it a little faster? Or is this something that other cities are doing and they've already got a RFQ or an RFP that they're using and a partner that they're working with?
Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachoff, not to our knowledge, definitely not in the West Valley. I know our West Valley city partners are very interested to see what we do with this because they want to make sure that it includes cooperative purchasing language so that they can link to this agreement if they need to. So to our knowledge, no. Obviously, the city of Phoenix receives a significant, and with the COVID funding, received a significant amount of ESG funding. We have not had, very specific discussions with them. However, the city of Phoenix has, other facilities in their community that they're likely allocating those funds to. So no, to our knowledge, we would be the first doing something like this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I think both sides make a logical and compelling argument, both for and against. So I might suggest this for your consideration, is that we go ahead and approve the presentation as provided to us today, but with the caveat that we establish a contingency amount that could come from our other funding source, I think you said ESG, although I may be wrong, that could come from that amount to supplement for additional eviction prevention if necessary. and you would come back to us and say, we find the need to use an additional 200,000 or 500,000. And that way, we have indicated our commitment for eviction prevention in a timely manner. We've established some kind of process by recognizing some kind of contingency fund and the ability to move money if needed. And you're the ones that would know if it's needed. But at least that way we could keep the money flowing when the 400,000 is totally expended. Thank you, Mayor.
And if I might just remind everybody, there's going to be a change of command in about the next 3 weeks or so in DC. And we're making an assumption that we don't get any more money. I'm sort of betting on the other side that I think there will be some more money coming from DC. But I do agree it'd be nice to have money aside, or at least a box set aside to where if we need it, we have it available to us. But I think that I think DC is not finished doling out money until this COVID's taken care of.
Mayor, thank you. So as I understand it, our staff has successfully and effectively rolled out over $4 million worth of relief to our community, and I compliment you and commend you for that. We have $400,000 left. We have some of this ESG money. I'm okay with, I could concur with authorizing up to that $3,271,698. And if between now and the time that we actually vote to appropriate it, staff's been able to find opportunities to roll some of this money out more quickly, then you have the flexibility to do that and not be locked into a consensus from the council for exactly this number. So that's something I could align with, I think, so that we keep the option open to be able to provide as much quick relief that is appropriate, fiscally responsible, and also try something innovative, which is to do an umbrella all needs kind of a contract that also keeps us open for that potential of additional CARES Act money in the future. So that's where I stand now. So thank you very much for your additional explanation and for the good work that your department does. I'm really proud of what we have been able to do. Thank you.
What do you got next?
The third consolidated goal is to increase public services for vulnerable populations. This first number that you see here, the 370, is we obtained from consensus from the council in October. This is planning ahead for FY22. So you see that nice round number is approximately 15% of our estimated allocation for next year, which would adjust slightly, more than likely, once we do get our final allocations. The second number, as we had discussed in October, would include funding either unfunded or underfunded grant allocations or grant applications from last fiscal year. We do know that there is a continuing need for some of those programs, for many of them. Those are listed in your council report. So if you have any questions about the specific applications or the public services process, I'm happy to do that. One thing additional to note, we have not received any kind of guidance from HUD for FY22 as to waiving that 15% cap. When we're talking about the CARES funding and FY21, FY20, HUD did waive those 15% cap. However, since we have not received indication from them for the time being, for the purposes of discussion and planning, we are assuming right now that that cap will go back into effect at 15%.
Thank you. Like a dummy, I didn't understand that when I read this supplementary page that was given to us. The amounts being requested will fully fund the original amounts requested. I thought that they were getting additional monies that hadn't been requested. So just to make clear, we are now fully funding the agencies that are listed on this sheet. Thank you.
Questions on this slide, we'll go ahead and move on to goal number 4, which is education and business assistance. So I know at the October workshop, there was some discussion about digital connectivity and how that's impacting our community as a result of COVID. This discussion about connectivity for our low to moderate income families has been something that staff has been discussing since COVID began, because there was a significant concern about ensuring that students weren't getting lost, especially our low to moderate income students. And so we came up with what you'll see here is a couple of recommendations. I want to reiterate, these are just placeholders. It's not to say that this is the amount of money that would ultimately be spent, because again, this is a conceptual idea. However, again, it's COVID-related funding, so we'd like to get this money out into the community as soon as possible. We serve through our housing choice voucher and public housing programs. We serve a little over 1,500 families, and we did survey them. We actually got a pretty good sample size with a 95% confidence level, a plus or minus 10. And about a third of all of those families have children in those homes that are required to do distance learning, or at least at the time that we surveyed, which was about 4 weeks ago. And then about a third do not have internet access. And so what we've proposed here, because we serve two different clientele with public housing specifically, so obviously our housing choice voucher recipients who live at a variety of places across the community, and then our public housing facilities. So one of the things that we do know is that having access to the internet in today's day and age is no longer a luxury. It really is a necessity, especially in a COVID-related environment. And so we do feel, and CDAC felt very strongly as well, that this is an important investment to make. If it turns out that there is not a need in the community, again, those funds would be repurposed for other uses. But we do believe that having some form of a mobile hotspot program where low to moderate income families can receive a device and up to 12 months of service for that device, prepaid, would be ideal scenario. And then using this as an opportunity to invest in digital accessibility at our public housing facilities. The idea here is that we want to make sure that it's something that's sustainable as part of our public housing program over time. So that is a key component to it. And then ultimately, we would be looking for community partners who may be willing to invest, as we've seen lots of other companies out there who are investing in bridging the digital divide. So that would be the hope, is that we could leverage funding from other sources and the corporate community to help us provide services to our low to moderate income families in Glendale.
Jean, could you go into a little bit more detail on the partnership? For example, what we were discussing yesterday with the laptops in the schools.
Mayor Wires and members of the council. So we kind of initially took a step back and wanted to wait and see what the schools were doing, because initially we thought maybe we might need to think about devices, like actual laptop devices versus the connectivity. We saw that the schools were investing in rolling out the devices. They have invested to some degree in the mobile hotspots. Some of the service providers have stepped up and are providing discounted rates for low to moderate income families. So anyone who's on free and reduced lunch, they get a discounted rate for that mobile connectivity. We see this as a potential opportunity to create the partnerships to create a little bit more longevity for specifically at the public housing facilities, those 155 units. But then ultimately, is this something that for our housing choice voucher recipients, it can be part of a programmatic approach? At the end of the day, our goal is to help folks who are receiving those services to break that cycle of poverty, to become employed to a higher degree so that they can move into financial sustainability, become homeowners, et cetera. It's very difficult to do that if you don't have digital connectivity or if you don't have the same access that other individuals might. You know, that's how you apply for jobs. That's how you apply for services. That's how adults get education in today's day and age. And so this is an opportunity to make an attempt to level the playing field for our low to moderate income families in Glendale. And again, the hope would be that we have community partners who are interested in helping us do that and would also provide some resources to advance that objective.
Mayor, I can support the concept of mobile hotspots. I think the entire city should have that ability to connect to the internet. So mobile hotspots are fine. But from what I'm hearing is we're also going to provide the laptops. Yes? No? All right. Explain to me, because the first thought that popped into my head was, how are the schools teaching these kids through distance learning if they don't have A, internet connectivity, and B, if they don't have a laptop? How are these, I mean, they've got to provide something to these kids. So I think I need to understand more about what you mean about hotspots and mobile connectivity and the whole issue of laptops.
Mayor and Councilmember Clark, so what the proposal here is that we would provide a device, which is the mobile hotspot, and the subscription for 12 months to pay for that service. Individuals who receive that device would be able to use that device to connect.
What is a device? Is it a router, or, I mean, how do they need a laptop?
In most cases.
Is that
So
the
you can,
device that we are providing?
with
for
a
12
with a
months?
mobile
Yeah,
hotspot,
okay, I'm going to remind both of you, through the chair, please.
I'm sorry, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Mayor and Councilmember Clark, with a mobile hotspot, you can connect any type of a device that has wireless connectivity to it. So you could connect a tablet to it, you could connect a laptop to it, a desktop computer. You can connect your mobile phone to it as a Wi-Fi connection.
Mayor,
So
Mayor, if I could interrupt. So we are talking about providing a device, whether it be a laptop or a tablet or whatever.
What she's calling a device is the thing that allows your device to,
That's what I'm trying to understand, and I
yeah.
keep,
She's not talking about phones or laptops.
okay.
At the home itself is what she's calling the device that allows this to work.
That's why I asked about a router or
Right.
whatever was,
And I don't know what the proper name of it is, but hotspot, yeah, that's what it is.
Mayor and Councilmember Clark, no, we are not proposing that we're providing the tablet or laptop or desktop computer. We're proposing that we provide the device, which is called a hotspot, that allows those
Okay.
laptop, tablets, and computers to connect to the internet wirelessly.
okay, that's, Mayor, that's what I didn't understand. I was saying, okay, I know that there's a concept of hotspots, but I don't know how they are provided. So my assumption was that when you keep saying device, it has to be a device that I'm familiar with, which would be a laptop or a tablet or whatever. But Councilmember Turner is educating me right now on hotspots. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, so if you hold on just a second, I'm going to ask my assistant, Kirsten, if she'd come up to the podium and tell everybody briefly what one of the schools that we did, I don't know, 6-8 weeks ago, what they received. And what we're hoping is that with what Jean's proposing, by partnering with businesses within Glendale and the state, that we might be able to put a package together where it's not just the city and the schools, but it's also business partners. If you'll just briefly tell what happened a month or so ago.
Mayor and council. So about 8 weeks ago, we were invited by the superintendent of Glendale Elementary School District to go out to a local school. The principal of a different school within the district had applied for a grant program through Verizon, and Verizon was kind enough, I think Councilmember Clark is very aware of this program, had provided, I believe, 4th through 8th graders tablet and the hotspot in question, the device that gave them the access. The reason they did that was because hotspots are mobile, so they're not huge, they don't have to plug into the wall. They are very similar to your cellular device, so they are very mobile and able to go with a tablet to wherever the child is needing to get the education. Or accessing the education. The district had gotten 2 schools approved last year, and they applied for the grant program and had gotten 2 more approved this year. I know that Verizon was looking at expanding those programs out, and that principal had actually reached out to me and then asked for my help in getting the word out to other districts to teach them. He'd be more than happy to provide the time and the knowledge in how to write your application for the grant in order to give you a higher ability to get approved. So I know I had connected him with Peoria Unified and Deer Valley because they were absolutely interested.
And so if you would, the amount total, and then who received them?
It was 2 schools. Do you remember, Councilmember Clark? I don't remember the 2 schools, but they're in Glendale Elementary School District.
They both were desert schools on Orangewood and about 72nd and about 78th Avenues. And they both had desert something.
In
so
the name.
Yeah, it was
You are
like,
correct.
like desert, I'm going to say
Desert Star and
Spirit.
Desert Horizon or something
Yeah,
like that. You are
yeah,
correct.
exactly.
Again, my point, it wasn't just the students, it was also,
Yeah, the teachers received, it was the 4th through 8th grade students and then all the teachers and the aides that helped those students succeed got the tablet and the hotspots. I think when we asked the gentleman, it was well over $500,000.
so anyway, that was the
and
point
stuff.
I was trying to make, is I think there's a great opportunity working with some of our local folks, partnering with the city, with the schools. I think that we can make a pretty successful program if we do it right.
Any other? Yes, Mayor. I agree. The one thing that I would just remind everyone on this is it is a little bit different because we do have to ensure that 70% of the funding is to serve low to moderate income families, but that's definitely not something that should be a barrier to creating a partnership with the business community. Any other questions on this particular item? So goal 5 is neighborhood livability. You'll see on this particular slide that we are not recommending COVID-related funding for these 2 particular programs, but just regular CDBG funding for the fiscal year 21-22, and then also that remnant funding for those projects that had come in under budget, repurposing those programs, or excuse me, repurposing the funding. The first item here is a hazardous structure demolition. We work very closely with our Development Services Department and our Building Safety Division, and we know that there are a variety of structures throughout the city, residential structures, that are hazardous, that likely need to be abated, and so this is an opportunity to help create some strategy around doing those abatements, through some sort of a ranking process. So we'd be working very closely with building safety if council provides direction to move forward. And the second piece of it is something that we'd like to see moving, forward into the future if possible. In the past, city departments have come before CDAC requesting funding. They'd write a grant proposal just like any other subrecipient would to request an investment of CDBG funds in physical improvement projects. Some of the past projects have been, at O'Neill Park. We've had Murphy Park. Had some investment in Bonsall Park, the downtown cafe lighting, et cetera. What we're proposing here is that we have a set aside of $550,000 to fund those projects that are shovel ready. So we would need to get them to that point to where the costs are defined clearly versus just guessing at what they might be, and that this ultimately gets folded into a broader capital improvement program. And so when you look at things throughout the city where we're missing like basic city infrastructure, curb, gutters, sidewalks, streetlights as an example, we can work with our transportation department to get that information, identify where those areas exist in the city, do overlays with our low to moderate income census tracts, and identify a strategy to advance those projects while relieving transportation funds or general fund from, so that they can use their funds for other programs and projects. This also will allow us to create a demonstrated visual impact in communities versus kind of a peanut butter spread approach. So the idea here is we basically create, although the investment is small, $550,000 when you're talking about capital projects isn't a lot, but at the hope is that we would be able to put together a program of projects that would help create a demonstrated community benefit. The other part of it that we heard from council in October was about some sort of a neighborhood grants type of a program. And that is something that we're looking at. How could we incorporate an opportunity for neighborhoods to tell us what their struggles are, what their concerns are with physical improvement type projects in their neighborhood. So that is something that we would explore an opportunity for building that into future iterations of the program. So I'll pause here to answer any questions about this particular investment recommendation. And so the last investment recommendation is regarding the goal to further fair housing regulations. So what you'll see here on the slide, the first two items are actually part of those unfunded grant applications from this current fiscal year. And then the last is a recommendation. When we were putting the numbers together, we had about $52,000 left to allocate, and we do believe that the need for community legal services as a result of evictions that may be pending or filed in the community is going to be great. And so we're recommending an additional investment in free community legal services to help families in our community who might have been served with eviction or might need help with fair housing items. I did provide some additional follow-up from the last council workshop regarding the requirement for any grant recipients like the city to make an affirmation that we are taking specific actions to further fair housing practices. And this is one way that we do that. So with that, I'll pause and answer any questions about this particular slide. So we took a pause behind each of those recommendations for the consensus. And so, Mayor, I would just ask if there is general consensus for the recommendations that were presented today, with the caveat on the homeless strategy that we would design a plan that could spend up to that dollar amount under an umbrella services contract. But if we see a need to where we need to divert some of that funding to our own eviction prevention programming, that we have the ability and authority to do that. Great. So to just conclude today, thank you very much for your time. We do have, just as a reminder for the council and the public, the grant application process for public services is currently open, and we have communicated that with with our distribution list for those public service subrecipients. It does close on December 31st, so if you are associated with any organizations that typically compete for those funds, we encourage them to get their application in as soon as possible. In the meantime, we'll be preparing two items for the council. One will be the action plan amendment that will come for a vote, and that will be to amend our fiscal year 2021 action plan to include these additional CARES Act allocations that we spoke about today. And then we'll be developing the required RFQs and RFPs for the fiscal year 2021 plan, as well as thinking ahead into the future for that 21-22 action plan. And then ultimately, the 21-22 action plan will follow standard process. We'll require a council workshop in March to review those recommendations for the public services for the next plan cycle. There's a required public comment period, public hearing, and then ultimately council action. At this time, HUD has not issued any additional waivers as it relates to the requirement for public comment and public hearing, so we are going to continue planning as though those things still need to occur. And that concludes my
Sorry, your call cannot be completed at this time.
and that
Please
concludes
hang up
our
and try your call
presentation.
again
Thank you.
later.
All right, thank you. Mr. Phelps, anything?
Mr. Mayor, council members, I have 6 items I'd like to brief you on quickly. First, today our COVID team met earlier this morning, and after looking at current numbers that are happening through the CDC regarding the number of new cases and some of the trend lines, we've decided to cancel the chocolate event for the chocolate experience for this year. We just feel like with the amount of people that would normally come to this and the amount of space we have to spread them out, that what you'd almost have to do is artificially keep the event down to a couple hundred people, and that kind of negates the purpose for doing the event. So we'll be reaching out to our merchants downtown in the chamber to let them know. But if you recall, we had mentioned we would have a kind of response back to you early December, and we don't see the numbers getting better. As a matter of fact, as you've been following, they've been getting a little bit more challenging as of late. My second item then is speaking to that. If you saw today's report produced by Nicole Munson, they showed that we had roughly around 9,800 new cases here in Maricopa County. And so there was some clarification done to that, and what she indicated, those were actually numbers for Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, but that our current 7-day average is about 3,457. That exceeds our previous high 7-day average of around 3,200. And we've not yet seen the impact of the Thanksgiving holiday weekend. We think that's always a lagging indicator, but again, wanted to let you know that the numbers were reflective of 3 days of collection, not one. However, we still feel that the things that we're doing in terms of limiting events here in the city are the right path forward. The next item I want to talk to you about is yesterday. We did send out a memo to you, but we did get the new Arrowhead Volvo store opened officially, and have product and salespeople, and they are conducting business. And that opened again yesterday. And then work is quickly proceeding next door to the Volvo site, which is next door to Arrowhead BMW. And we expect in February, they're still on track to open a new Arrowhead Jaguar and an Arrowhead Land Rover dealership. And so that'll give us 4 dealerships there side by side in that area. Obviously, they've limited some of the grand opening exercises right now just because of the COVID, but they're hoping that sometime later on the first quarter of next year that we can do a little bit bigger celebration to celebrate the new auto row that has been taking place. Next item is, despite all the things that are happening in the pandemic, our development services team, both planning and building safety, are as busy as they've ever been in anybody's recent memory. And while we've done a phenomenal job of pushing out electronic tools to be able to allow plan submission and other kinds of interaction electronically, there are still a number of our clients that prefer and need to be able to meet in person with our planning staff or with building safety. As such, they're not always just a single person. And so staff has implemented a new app called Wait While, and this is an app that we're now driving out to our customers for who want to come down to City Hall. It allows them to do their appointment online. It then tracks how they're doing, and so they don't have to wait up on the second floor. It notifies them when their slot is ready to be able to come in and to meet with the staff. And it automatically allows a 15-minute interval between when the prior group has left so that we can go in and do proper cleaning and sanitation of the area. And again, staff's worked really quickly to get this out just to give our customers one more option as they go forward. The next thing is, as you recall, we had quite a bit of discussion about having new economic development tools. And some of those tools were including the authorization to create a revitalization district for putting in infrastructure. Staff had been working hard on a concept around a revitalization district in the Loop 303 area. We did learned today that they've decided to not pursue the RD. However, I think it was a good exercise for us because we're far more knowledgeable on what it would take to put an RD in place. At the end of the day, they had numerous owners that were coming together, and they weren't all on the same timeline for their development cycle, and it just kind of, in the day, they weren't able to put everybody on the same page. But again, with Vicki and our team, did a great job of assisting the client on what the RD district would look like. Then just to end on a good note, I mean, as we continue to stay very, very busy here in Glendale, we had a client come to us here in the last several days that needed a quick response back on a land use to make sure that a proposed project could go on the site. And what we understand, and it can, and so we will have a new client. We believe they've got clients in tow already. It's an out-of-state developer, and they said they'll have plans submitted to us for about 1.9 million square feet of development space. And this, again, was never on our radar map, regardless of all the other things that are happening on the 303 loop. It's funny, when I came here in 2016, we settled our dispute with Con Air, and then soon after they built a 1 million square foot facility, which we were really excited about. And it's almost, with the way things are going, I mean, we've had numerous 1 million square foot projects, and in some cases we're talking now in terms of projects handling 7 or 8 million square feet of space. So certainly things have changed here over the last 4.5 years here in Glendale. But this is a tribute to really the council and their actions of setting up the Loop 303 as a job center, and it's certainly paying its dividends. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I complete my report.
Thank you. I almost want you to do it again. It just sounded so good. Okay, city attorney's report.
No report.
Okay, council items of special interest. Mr. Eldama, are you still on the phone with us? Okay.
Can you hear me?
You are there. Okay, do you have anything to share?
No, not at all.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Clark?
Nothing at this time, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Hugh?
Nothing, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Tomchak?
Nothing today, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Turner?
Not today, Mayor.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Nothing today.
Okay, and I'm not going to break ranks. I have nothing also. So, moving on, can I get a motion to go into executive session?
So move.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, vote aye.
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 Any opposed, vote nay. Appears the ayes have it, do have it. Council meeting is recessed for exec.